The Plishtim rallied their troops for war, assembling at Sycho, Sacho, in Yehuda, and setting up camp between Sacho and Ezekiah in Ephes Damim. Shaul and the men of Israel assembled, set up camp in Elah Valley, and drew up their battle line opposite of the Plishtim. The Plishtim occupied a position on the hill, and Israel in a position on the other hill, with a valley between them. There came out a champion from the camp of the Plishtim named Goliath from Gath, who was 9 feet 9 inches tall. He had a bronze helmet on his head, and he wore a bronze armor plate weighing 120 pounds. He had bronze armor protecting his legs and a bronze javelin between his shoulders. The shaft of his spear was as big as a weaver's beam, and the iron spearhead weighed 50 pounds. His shield bearer went ahead of him. He stood and yelled at the armies of Israel, "Why come out and draw up a battle line? I am a Plishtim, and you are a servant of Shaul. So choose a man for yourselves, and let him come down to me. If he can fight me and kill me, we'll be your slaves. But if I beat him and kill him, you will become slaves and serve us." The Plishtim added, "I challenge Israel's armies today. Give me a man, and we'll fight it out." When Shaul and all Israel heard those words of the Plishtim, they were shaken and terrified. Now David was the son of that Aphriti from Bethlehem in Yehuda named Yashai. He had 8 sons, and in the time of Shaul he was old. The years had taken their toll. Yishai's and his 3 oldest sons had followed Shaul to battle. The names of these 3 sons who went out to battle were Eliab, the firstborn, next to him Abinadab, and the third Shammah. David was the youngest. The 3 oldest followed Shaul. David went back and forth from Shaul to pasture his father's sheep at Bethlehem. Meanwhile, the Plishti approached with his challenge every morning and evening for 40 days. Yashi said to David, "Son, please take your brother's 5 bushels of this roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread. Hurry, carry them to your brothers at the camp. Also bring these 10 cheeses to their field officer. Find out if your brothers are well. Bring back some token from them. Shaul and your brothers with all the army of Israel are in Elah Valley fighting the Plishtim." David got up early in the morning, left the sheep with a helper, took his load, and set out, as Yishai had ordered him. He arrived at the barricade of the camp just as the troops were going out to their battle stations and shouting the war cry. Israel and the Plishtim had set up their battle lines facing each other. David left his equipment in charge of the equipment guard, ran to the troops, went to his brothers, and asked if they were well. As he was talking with them, there came the champion, the Plishti, from Gath, named Goliath, from the ranks of the Plishtim, saying the same words as before, and David heard them. When the soldiers from Israel saw the man, they ran away from him, terrified. The soldiers from Israel said to each other, "You saw this man who came up? He has come to challenge Israel, and whoever kills him, the king will give a rich reward. He'll also give him his daughter and exempt his father's family from all service and taxes in Israel." David said to the men standing with him, "What reward will be given to the man who kills the Plishti and removes this disgrace from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Plishti anyway, that he challenges the armies of the living God?" The people answered with what they had been saying, adding, "That's what will be done for the man who kills him." Aviav, his oldest brother, heard when David spoke to the men, and it made Aviav angry at him. He asked, "Why did you come down here? Whom did you have? When did you leave the few sheep in the desert? You know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is. "You just came down to watch the fighting," David said. "What I have done now?" "I only ask a question." He turned away from him to someone else and asked the same question, and the people gave him the same answer. David's words were overheard and told to Shaul, who summoned him. David said to Shaul, "No one should lose heart because of him. Your servant will go and fight this Plishti." Shaul said to David, "You can't go fight this Plishti. You're just a boy. He has been a war from his youth." David answered Shaul, "Your servant used to guard his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear would come and grab a lamb from the flock, I would go after it, hit it, and snatch the lamb from its mouth. And if it turned on me, I would catch it by the jaw, smash it, and kill it. Your servant has defeated both lions and bears. This uncircumcised Plishti will be like one of them, because he has challenged the armies of the living God." Then David said, "Adonai, who rescued me from the paw of the lion, from the paw of the bear, will rescue me from the paw of this Plishti." Shaul said to David, "Go, may Adonai be with you." Shaul dressed David in his own armor. He put a bronze helmet on his head and gave his armor plate to wear. David buckled his sword and his armor and tried to walk, but he wasn't used to such equipment. David said to Shaul, "I can't move wearing these things, because I'm not used to them." So David took them off. Then he took his stick in his hand and picked 5 smooth stones from the riverbed, putting them on the shepherd's bag in his pouch. Then, with his sling in his hand, he approached the Plishti. The Plishti, with his shield bearer ahead of him, came nearer and nearer to David. The Plishti looked David up and down and had nothing but scorn for what he saw. A boy with ruddy cheeks, red hair, and good looks. The Plishti said to David, "Am I a dog? Is that why you're coming at me with sticks?" The Plishti cursed David by his God. Then the Plishti said to David, "Come here to me, so I can give your flesh to the birds in the air and the wild animals." David answered the Plishti, "You are coming at me with a sword, a spear, and a javelin, but I am coming at you in the name of Adonai Svaoth, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have challenged. Today Adonai will hand you over to me. I will attack you, loop your head off, and give the carcass of the armies of the Plishtim to the birds in the air and the animals in this land. And all the land will know that there is a God of Israel, and everyone assembled here will know that Adonai does not save by the sword or spear, for this is Adonai's battle, and he will hand you over to us." When the Plishti got up, approached, and came close to meet David, David hurried and ran to the army to meet the Plishti. David put his hand in his bag, took a stone out, and hurled it with his sling. It struck the Plishti in his forehead and buried itself in the forehead, so that his face fell down to the ground. Thus David defeated the Plishti with a sling and a stone, striking the Plishti and killing him. David had no sword in his hand. And David ran and stood over the Plishti, took his sword, drew it out of its sheath, and finished killing him, cutting off his head with it. When the Plishti saw that their hero was dead, they fled. The men of Israel, Yehuda, got up, shouting, pursued the Plishtim all the way to Gat, the gates of Ekron. The wounded Plishtim fell down all along the road of the Shaaraim to Gat and Ekron. After chasing the Plishtim, the army of Israel returned and plundered their camp. David took the head of the Plishti and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put the armor of the Plishti in his tent. When Shaul saw David go out to fight the Plishti, he said to Abner, the army's commander, "Abner, whose son is this boy?" "By your life, O king," Abner replied, "I don't know." The king said, "Find out whose boy this is." As David returned from killing the Plishti, Abner took him and brought him to Shaul with the head of the Plishti in his hand. Shaul asked him, "Young man, whose son are you?" David answered, "I am the son of your servant Yishai, the Bethlehemi." By the time David finished speaking to Shaul, Jonathan found himself inwardly drawn by David's character, so that Yonatan loved him as he did himself. That day, Shaul took David into his service and would not let him go home to his father's house anymore. Yonatan made a covenant with David because he loved him as he did himself. Yonatan removed his cloak he was wearing and gave it to David, his armor too, including his sword, bow, and belt. David would go out, and no matter where Shaul sent him, he was successful. Shaul put him in charge of the fighting men. All the people thought is good, and so did Shaul's servants. As David and the others were returning from the slaughter of the Plishti, the women came out from all the cities of Israel to meet King Shaul, singing and dancing joyfully, with the tambourines, the three-stringed instruments. In their merrymaking, the women sang, "Shaul has killed his thousands, but David his tens of thousands." Shaul became very angry, because this song displeased him. He said, "They give David credit for tens of thousands, but give me credit for only thousands. Now all he lacks is the kingdom." From that day on, Shaul viewed David with suspicion. The following day, an evil spirit from God came powerfully over Shaul, so that he fell into a frenzy in the house. David was there playing the lyre, as on other occasions. This time, Shaul had a spear in his hand, and he drew that spear, thinking, "I will pin David to the wall." But David dodged out of the way twice. Shaul became afraid of David, because Adonai was with him and had left Shaul. Therefore Shaul put him at a distance from himself by making him commander over 1,000. His goings and comings became public knowledge. David had great success in all his ways. Adonai was with him. When Shaul saw how very successful he was, he became afraid of him. But all Israel and Yehuda loved David because they knew about all his campaigns. Shaul said to David, "Here is my older daughter, Merav. I will give her to you as your wife. Only continue displaying your courage for me and fight Adonai's battles." Shaul was thinking, "I don't dare touch him, so let the Plishtim do away with him." David's response to Shaul was, "Who am I, that I should become king's son-in-law? I don't have any kind of life. My father's family has no rank in Israel." However, when it was time for Merav, Shaul's daughter, to be given to David, she was given to Adriel, the Maglati, as his wife. But Michal, Shaul's daughter, fell in love with David. They told Shaul it pleased him. Shaul said, "I'll give her to him so that she can entrap him, and the Plishtim can do away with him." So Shaul said to David, "Today you will become my son-in-law through my second daughter." Shaul ordered his servants to speak privately with David and say, "Look, the king is pleased with you, and all his servants like you, so become the king's son-in-law." Shaul's servants said this to David, but David replied, "Do you think being the king's son-in-law is something to be treated so casually, given that I'm a poor man without social standing?" Shaul's servants reported back to him how David had responded. Shaul said, "Here's what you are to say to David. The king doesn't want any dowry. He wants 100 foreskins of the Plishtim, so that he can have vengeance on the king's armies and the king's enemies." For Shaul was hoping to have David killed by the Plishtim. When his servants said these words to David, it pleased David to become the king's son-in-law, even before the time for him to be married. David got up, set out, he and his men, and killed 200 men of the Plishtim. He brought their foreskins and gave them to the king in order to become the king's son-in-law. Then Shaul gave him Michal, his daughter, as his wife. Shaul saw and understood that Adonai was with David, and that Michal, Shaul's daughter, loved him. This only made Shaul even more afraid of David, so that Shaul became David's enemy for the rest of his life. The leaders of the Plishtim would attack, but whenever they attacked, David was more successful than any of Shaul's servants, so that David acquired a great reputation. Shaul told Yonatan his son and all his servants that they should have David killed. But because Yonatan was very fond of David, he told him, "My father Shaul is out to have you killed. Therefore you must be very cautious tomorrow morning. Find a well-concealed place to hide in. I will go out and stand next to my father in the countryside where you're hiding. I will talk with my father about you, and if I learn anything, I'll tell you. Yonatan spoke well of David to Shaul his father and said, the king shouldn't sin against his servant David, because he hasn't sinned against you. On the contrary, his work for you has been very good indeed. He put his life in his hands to attack the Plishtim, and Adonai accomplished a great victory for all Israel. You yourself saw it, and you were happy about it. So why do you want to sin against innocent blood by killing David without any reason? Shaul heeded Yonatan's advice and swore, as Adonai lives, he will not be put to death. Yonatan called David and told him all these things. Then Yonatan brought David to Shaul to be in attendance on the king as before. War broke out again, and David went and fought the Plishtim. He defeated them with all a great slaughter, and they fled before him. Then an evil spirit from Adonai came upon Shaul. He sat in his house with a spear in his hand. David was playing the lyre. When Shaul tried to pin David to the wall with the spear, but he lodged it and moved out of Shaul's way, so that the spear struck the wall. David fled, so that night he escaped. But Shaul sent messengers to David's house to watch him and kill him in the morning. Michal, David's wife, told him, if you don't save your life tonight, tomorrow you'll be dead. So Michal let David down through the window, and he left, fled, and escaped. Michal took the household idol, laid it on the bed, and put a goat's hair quilt in its head, and covered it with a cloth. When Shaul sent messengers to capture David, he said, he's ill. Shaul sent the messengers to see David with this order, bring him up to me, bed and all, so that I can kill him. But when the messengers entered, there before them was the household idol in the bed with the servant's goat hair quilt as its head. Shaul asked Michal, why did you deceive me this way and let my enemy go and escape? Michal answered Shaul, he threatened me. Let me go, or I'll kill you. David fled and escaped, then came to Shmuel in Ramah and told him everything Shaul had done to him. So he and Shmuel went and stayed in the prophet's dormitory. The news reached Shaul that David had been seen at the prophet's dormitory in Ramah. Shaul sent messengers to capture David. Well, when they saw the group of the prophets prophesying, Shmuel standing and leading them, the Spirit of God fell on Shaul's messengers, and they too began prophesying. When Shaul was told, he sent other messengers, but they too began prophesying. Shaul sent messengers a third time, and they also prophesied. Then he himself went to Ramah. When he arrived at the big cistern in Sehu, he answered, where are you, Shmuel and David? Someone answered, there are the prophets in the dormitory in Ramah. Well, on his way to the prophet's dormitory in Ramah, the Spirit of God fell on him too, and he went on prophesying until he arrived at the prophet's dormitory in Ramah. He also stripped off his clothes and prophesied in Shmuel's presence and lay there naked all night and day and all that night. Hence, it continues to be an expression, is Shaul a prophet too?